Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis today, we'll again discuss 7 to 8 important topics out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, as always, we have a Telegram quiz for you as soon as this session is over. So do like, share and subscribe to the Telegram channel and to our channel itself if you find it fruitful. So let's discuss what are the 7 topics we discussed today. A very interesting set, one a report card, something very interesting with regards to what is the new development in a certain area, and then certain Prelims Bytes area, which is smaller topics which don't have relevance though in the larger context of mains, but is generally important for your general knowledge. So first we'll discuss the report card, or what we call as an assessment of how India performed under the UNSC when it was president. And this is a very interesting article because it is coming out of the ambassador, the person who was in charge of that whole process within the UNSC. And because we're talking about UNSC reform and generally the United Nations, it's an interesting article, and there's a very good expected question which can come from this area because we have just ended that in December 2022, and that the mains of this year we can expect this type of question very easily. Thereafter, we'll go into HDI, Human Development Index, and now we will not discuss country by country, but within India, what is the regional disparity and how HDI is spread. So we need to change the methodology, and it will give you an alternative methodology for that. Then something interesting, which is foreign law firms, and recently the Bar Council has notified certain rules and regulations. Therefore, it becomes important to understand that. And thereafter, 4 topics, one with IPCC report, further going to the SCO and Buddhism becoming the soft power concept. Thereafter, 2 concepts related to economics. First, the current account deficit and how the Q3 performance has not been as good as the Q2 one. And thereafter, gold imports, because we love gold, so we import too much gold, and how the smuggling of gold has increased close to 10%, has doubled within the same period whilst the 2 years. And if you look at the larger impact of gold imports, it's not good to the Indian economy. So we'll discuss all of these things. Good morning, and let us now begin our analysis for today. So this is an interesting article because it's a very realistic question, a very representative concept. These are the articles for which we actually read the Hindu newspaper, because this talks about the achievements, the performance of India as the president of the UNSC. And because this was the 8th time India became a part of the UNSC itself, and it's a very important position generally, we need to see what are the issues which came to India, what was the focus of India, and what has India achieved generally whilst being a non-permanent member within the UNSC. Now, before we again go into the larger nitty-gritties or the smaller points of the article, why is this concept very important? This concept is very, very important for one very specific reason. Whenever India is at the world stage, it has a specific agenda, specific focus. And that focus technically tells you how India is diplomatically pivoting and how generally India is, the outlook is towards the global perspective or the global understanding of basic concepts. So it could be security, it could be terrorism, it could be trade. And India made it very clear what was its agenda. And the focus here was first maritime security. And maritime security becomes important in the context of the South China Sea. It's technically a jibe on China in a way. And therefore, maritime security became a very important concept. Again, I'm discussing the very basic concepts with you, wherein the focus is. Thereafter, we can go into the achievements. Thereafter, the next one had to be terrorism. And herein, the concept was that because now the West believes that there's something called terrorism, India wanted to push the concept of global terrorism and also emphasize in the needs to make sure that terrorism does not spread across borders. Thereafter, they also talked about UN peacekeeping. And this is somewhere India has a very specific interest, wherein Indians are a very sizable portion of the UN peacekeeping missions, and there are now women contingents also. Men already were participating in UN peacekeeping missions quite a lot. Nowadays more focused in the African sector, previously in the Balkan sector. And here India had two basic agendas. First was that we need to have the security of the UN peacekeepers. It should be secured, and more than that, it should be guaranteed, because there was a lot of violence and crime which was happening against the UN peacekeeping missions itself. And thereafter, second was about using modern surveillance and what is called under the UNITE program, that there should be modern surveillance techniques which should be used to track our UN peacekeepers. And the third most important concept within UN peacekeeping was that we need to ensure that it is safe. Because if it isn't safe, Indian interest is then not safeguarded. So in these three areas, India took basically three basic key interests it had under UNSC. First, maritime security, the presence of China in the Indian Ocean. Then Pakistan basically through terrorism. Thereafter, UN peacekeeping with regards to how Indians are a very sizable portion within the UN peacekeeping forces. And then the concept of multilateralism and global south. Now herein comes the fourth basic agenda which India had, which is the concept of UNSC reform, which is that the global south represented by India itself. The fact of the matter is that the Indian, African, even Australian, the South American interests are not represented quite well within the UNSC and generally in the UN. Therefore, there was a need to redefine multilateralism. Therefore, these four basic agendas dictated India's engagement as the president of the UNSC, and more than that, it also dictated how India responded to certain issues. Now, there are two basic components to this article. First is the focus and agenda, which I've already told you, and second is achievement. Now, why am I discussing this concept with you? Because very simply, there could be a very simple question with regards to what was the achievement, what was the performance, or how did India redefine its role or redefine the role of the presidency within UNSC? It's a very realistic question in GS paper 2, and you need to now note certain things down so that you understand them and you're able to write them, because without this article, which is an insider's perspective, it would be quite hard to get the larger macro picture here rather than going into the nitty-gritty. So, India in December 2022 ended its 8th stint in the UN Security Council, and by this India has increased the yardstick unprecedentedly, and basically it has created a major precedence of good work and decisive leadership. Now, as I said, the focus was in these four areas: maritime security, terrorism, UN peacekeeping, reforming multilateralism, and global south. Please remember this, because this is prelims oriented also and this is mains oriented also, because they can ask you what was the basic agenda of India within the UNSC, and this could be a very simple question, a very easy and scoring question, but you need to know the specificities. Then further, when India did get elected to the chair, they were also elected to three very important committees. Now again, we would not get to know this because he is the author of this article, was the ambassador, the permanent member or the permanent representative of India within the UNSC. He gives us a very interesting and very important perspective in the larger context. So what were the three committees India was part of? Now this is like a report card. What did India do as the UNSC president? So it was part of the Taliban Sanctions Committee once Taliban took over in Afghanistan, the Libyan Sanction Committee because of the violence which is happening in Libya, and the Counter-Terrorism Committee. Now this was significant. However, we were not able to achieve all our targets when it comes to counter-terrorism because of how China and Pakistan connive to make sure that certain terrorists are not tagged as global terrorists. Thereafter, for the first time, the Prime Minister chaired a UNSC meeting on maritime security in which he asserted the UNCLOS, the fact that the law of the sea and more than that, piracy and safe passage within maritime routes is a very important concept and a right which every nation should have today in this modern world. And he asserted the fact that certain irritants, again a jibe on China, a type of counter to China, saying that there should not be extraterritorial actors or even state actors who try to do or influence maritime security in such a way that it is hurting global interests. So again, a very interesting concept which comes through. Thereafter, there were already a lot of issues which were in front of the UNSC, from Myanmar to Afghanistan to Ethiopia to Mali to Syria to Palestine. Then one more issue got added when India was president, that is Ukraine. And herein comes India's very important role in the Ukraine conflict, wherein India was a very important mediator because the P5 in that sense was pulling in different directions and India needed to make sure that the resolutions were much clearer. But herein also comes the criticism which India faced, being the president of the P5, being the president of the UNSC, that India did not take a stand. It abstained from voting 2 to 3 times because of a historical relationship with Russia. Therefore, the Ukraine conflict and Myanmar, 3 very basic transitions and major crises came during our presidency itself, and how we managed it is very, very important. So now this was the basic perspective of what India's agenda was. Now what did we achieve? What is our performance? And this is what goes into the answer and goes into your mains answer when there is certain kind of question with regards to India's contribution to the UNSC. First, when there was the military takeover, the coup in Myanmar in February of 2021, India took decisive leadership because the ASEAN countries plus the P5 all were again pulling in different directions. There was no clear resolution which was coming through, and India therefore was the one which was able to understand what was the need of Myanmar, and because we have a very long border with Myanmar itself, it was important to make sure that Myanmar does not destabilize too much, and therefore there were very balanced and comprehensive resolutions which were passed under India's presidency, and therefore in December of 2022, before our presidency ended, all resolutions with regards to Myanmar were actually accepted. Now, the basic point which would come to your mind is, do we need to know the details of these resolutions? No. There is no need to go into this much detail. You just need to know the countries in which India very actively played a role in mitigation. If you will go into further detail, then you're technically going maybe into optional level or in unnecessary zone where you technically don't need to go into that much detail itself. So we know that Myanmar was one conflict in which India did play a very important role in making sure that the resolution of the UN, as it is UN resolutions are mostly confusing, giving some form of decisive understanding. Thereafter, Afghanistan, very famous, August of 2021, when Afghanistan power was seized by the Taliban. Again, America was one of the culprits which led to this takeover itself. And again, the P5 was very, very quickly divided over the issue of Afghanistan itself. And India passed a resolution, and now you need to know this resolution because this can come in the examination. UNSC resolution 2593. Please remember this basic number 2593. If they ask you what is the UN resolution 2593, it is technically Afghanistan related and talking about how Taliban should not spread terrorism outside Afghanistan soil. And though the general dialogue between the UNSC and the Taliban did not go very well, the point of the matter was that India made sure that there was a mandate from the UN which said that we need to contain the Taliban within Afghanistan. For our purpose, what is more important is 2593 UNSC resolution about Afghanistan. This is our purpose is to clear the examination. So we need to make sure that 2593, if it comes in the examination, we know it is Afghanistan. They can easily ask you a very simple question with regards to this. Then further, a very significant place where India wanted to contribute and was very active also was technically the UNSC Counter-Terrorism Committee, the CTC it is called. The CTC chair was very important. India wanted to push a lot of different agendas within this committee. However, we were not able to push a lot of the terrorists we wanted to push into the global terrorism list because of China and Pakistan connivance. Most of these terrorists sitting and are working within Pakistan itself. Therefore, China vetoing most of these resolutions. But a major significant contribution, a major significant moment for India was when Abdul Rahman Makki who's the chief or the deputy chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba, who was designated as a global terrorist. Now this is something under 1267. Remember, UNSC resolution 1267 is basically based on global terrorists. Now these two numbers become very, very important for you, generally for your examination, and mains more specifically, because you would have to write these two numbers in the exam. Now, why is this significant? Because India was at least able to get one of its most important and terrorist actors to get designated as global terrorist. Though it was also able to expose China's agenda generally, but the basic point of the matter is very simple. The fact is that India had a specific agenda in the CTC. We pushed it. However, China blocked it, and we got one important, significant development out of this whole process. Now again, as I said, you don't have to go into too much detail, but this much detail should be enough to write a mains answer. And I have a question for you in the end so that you can practice also, because it's a very realistic question. Thereafter, going beyond these two agendas, if you look at the UN peacekeeper side, this is where India's interest was very, very important, because there's a significant portion of Indians who go into the UN peacekeeping missions. These are missions which go into conflict zones where there needs to be a certain type of neutrality maintained. However, there were a lot of crimes and violence which was happening against these men and women itself. Therefore, there was a need to make sure that the Indian interest and generally peacekeepers' interest is safeguarded. Therefore, the largest contribution of any other country, India is the largest contributor to the UN peacekeepers, including having a women peacekeepers mission and a contingent itself. And under the Unite Aware technology, now this is what is important for you for the examination. This was already in the news. We have already discussed this previously, but as a report card, it is very, very important. Unite Aware technology, wherein the concept of real-time tracking and modern surveillance to make sure that the safety of the peacekeepers is secure. And more than that, in August of 2021, we were the first country to ever pass a resolution in the last 5 decades where we have talked about accountability when there is crime against UN peacekeepers. Because what was happening is that in conflict zones, nobody was owning up, or there was no accountability to anybody if a peacekeeper was dying. And because there were multiple instances in which our soldiers were martyred, the basic point of the matter was that there needed to be an accountability to who should be accountable for the death of the peacekeeper. And this was something which was technically not ever in the understanding of UN generally, and we brought in that there needs to be accountability for the crime against peacekeepers. And thereafter, we also gave 2 lakh vaccines for the UN peacekeepers in the general context. Last but not the least, India also, and I'll give you a basic overview of this topic in the end, because there are certain points you need to remember. The basic point was that India also talked about, and this is where India and Pakistan, how India is very different to Pakistan. We also talked about religiophobia. We said that the Abrahamic religions, the Jews, the Christians and Islam, specifically this phobia, Islamophobia and religiophobia with regards to people discriminating, acting against, and even performing certain type of violence against certain religions. India talked about the fact that that needs to stop. That needs to stop. India was again a pioneer in saying that this Islamophobia, this basic religiophobia, which is there in the world right now with regards to certain religions, certain identities, certain cultures, also needs to go. Wherein we need to have a secular outlook, and we need to understand and honor and also in a way respect all forms of religion. This is unlike any other country as of right now, where India is talking about the crime against certain religions. Therefore, if you look at this whole article generally, and this is the basic gist I'm trying to give you, I'm trying to repeat the whole article but in a gist. Now please pay attention. There are three basic things this whole topic is trying to talk about. First, that what was India's agenda? Maritime security, UN peacekeeping. Then further it talked about global terrorism and global south and multilateralism. Then what was India's achievement? India's achievement, Myanmar, a major decisive resolution. In Afghanistan, containing Taliban within Afghanistan itself. Then after 2593, then the concept of the CTC, the Terrorism Committee and Makki. Then the third most important concept is what has India done for peacekeeping missions. UN peacekeeping is a very important process and a very important part of the UN itself. And we talked about surveillance so that they are safe. Second, we gave them vaccines. And third, we also talked about accountability when there is any form of crime against them. And in the end, India also talked about UN and generally the world having a secular outlook, an outlook how we believe in unity in diversity. The world should believe in unity in diversity. The fact of the matter is that certain religions, certain cultural identities, certain people are targeted for their religion, their identity or their culture, and that needs to stop. So it's a very comprehensive article, very interesting article in that sense, and it's a very realistic question which can come in the examination. So I hope that you understand the basic contours of this article and the basic point of this discussion. Do you? Then we move to the next one, which is an interesting one. Again, HDI. Yes? Yes, perfect. Now we come to HDI, Human Development Index. Now India has been very well when it comes to economic performance, though we have seen ups and downs. 5 to 6% when the world is 1%, 2% growth, India has been showing at least 5 to 6% growth in that sense. However, economic growth always does not correspond to human development. And therefore, HDI, India has always struggled and generally there's a problem. However, this article is interesting because it says that this macro picture of India distorts how technically our states are performing. And therefore, the basic point of this article was that if we go down to the, when we call the federal level, which is understanding each and every state, we get a different picture altogether. Because certain states are pulling back the HDI, certain states' HDI are comparable to developed countries. Now, what are the basic indicators of HDI? We'll discuss that. We can revise the static portion here. But this is an interesting article because again, it gives you an alternative perspective. So please understand this. See, HDI indicators are based on GNI, which is gross national income per capita. Now, you would have to change the indicators in a certain way that they can work for states, and that is what the researcher has done. However, the basic point of the article is that we need to be a little bit more sensitive to the data rather than looking at the macro perspective, a little bit lower. If you go one step down, this larger HDI index ranking is not that meaningful than understanding regional disparity in India. Basically, they are arguing that HDI, when you look at the spread across India, it is quite significant and also is also contributing to the larger problem. So, India, one of the fastest growing economies, however, corresponding increase in HDI has not been there. And in 2021-22, HDI, the ranking of India was 132 out of 191 countries, performing even worse than Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, which is technically not basically indicative of how India is developing in the larger perspective. So the problem is that when we look at our economic and when we look at our human development, there's a major gap. And there needs to be a little bit of more convergence in that sense. And that convergence problem is that when we look at the states, the spread is quite a lot. So, what are the 4 basic indicators which are used to calculate HDI? First is life expectancy at birth, mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling, and gross national income per capita. So these are the 4 basic indicators. HDI used to come previously in the mains examination quite a lot. Now it has become more and more obscure, but this article brings this concept back to our understanding and our attention. So these 4 indicators basically gives you HDI of a country. You can see it's technically about education, it's about living standards, it's about how you have a certain amount of income within the whole country itself. But this technically does not give you the real perspective. So there's a need to redefine the indicators, and that is what has been done. Basically, the size and population warrants that India's human development should be seen state-wise. And this is wherein comes the alternative perspective. Remember this, that is why this article is very, very significant. And thereafter, by using gross state domestic product and dividing it with the population data which we have, which again is a little bit obscure because the census has not happened, the latest one has not happened till now, we can get the gross state GDP, gross state GDP, and you divide it with the population of the state to get per capita, And if you get this data, so basically what the researcher has done is that rather than looking at this basic indicator as a monolith, he's divided it. He's divided it according to states. And whilst mean year of schooling, life expectancy, and these data is very state specific, the problem was how do you make GNI per capita would mean per person, how do you make GNI per capita basically converted into a state level indicator. And what is done is that gross state domestic product has now been divided by the basic data which is available with the registrar of population, and therefore getting gross state domestic product per capita. Therefore, he has just replaced this basic indicator with a state specific indicator, therefore giving us a certain type of understanding state by state. Now this is the more ingenious part. This is where the author, who is the researcher himself, has performed a very important task of giving us a micro perspective. And if you look at the performance then you are able to actually see how India's HDI is spread across and is very, very varied, and how regional disparity, regional inequality, which you do in post-independence, still exists. So 5 states and UTs included, Delhi, Goa, Kerala, Sikkim and Chandigarh, have HDI. HDI is mostly generally between 0 to 1. It is the indicators between 0 to 1 is 0.799, and this is comparable to European countries. It's a very high, very, very high indicator and a very, very high number. Then 19 other states from Kerala, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Haryana, Punjab, Telangana, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh score between 0.7 to 0.799, which is again very high classification according to HDI. So if you take these two, India would come in a very high category of HDI itself. However, the spread comes when you add the other states, and this is where regional disparity and regional inequality comes through. So bottom 5 states, Bihar, UP, MP, Jharkhand, Assam, are medium level. Add to this list Orissa, Rajasthan, West Bengal, and these HDI scores are actually lower than the national average itself, and now are comparable to African countries such as Congo, Kenya, Ghana and Namibia. Now this is the problem, that till this point we remain in 0.7s. Thereafter we go under the national average from 0.5 to 0.3 at certain instances, and therefore making our HDI come down. It's not a competition, but it's the fact that in India itself the HDI is meaningless, because close to 60% of the states are performing well, but the 40% aren't. And this 40% is what is pulling the HDI down. However, if you look at how we are reacting to it also, is that we are still pushing money into the 60% or we are not aiding the 40%. And therein comes the concept of regional inequality. Thereafter, despite having the highest state GDP per capita, large states such as Gujarat, Haryana, however, are one example where the state GDP performance is very, very well, but they're not able to reach the top 5 because their human development indicators are not good. And on the other hand, Kerala has a very high HDI, though not comparable with regards to the state GDP per capita of maybe Gujarat and Tamil Nadu or Haryana. So big state, small state issue also comes through here. That is a bigger state a solution or a smaller state a solution, and there is no specific answer for that because Gujarat and Haryana are both on different spectrums, a small state, a big state, and both have very high state GDPs per capita. However, the HDI performance of both is low, and Kerala, a small state, has a very high HDI but not comparable with regards to per capita state GDP. So therefore, this is the real analysis we are doing right now and trying to understand how within India there is regional the disparity, the inequality is evident. And we talk about it quite a lot within post-independence, and when you are going to read about India and how when we got independence, there was already a problem of the certain states having permanent settlement, and generally the eastern sector, Bihar, Orissa and this whole Chota Nagpur plateau sector reeling under regional disparity and having the worst impact of British colonial, what we call as economic policy. However, 70 years on, the problem is still indicative. The problem is still indicative and it is still there. And it is not just indicated in economic indicators, it is indicated in human development indicators. Now this is where we need to open our eyes, and this is where your role in this type of question is very, very important. This is an alternative perspective. In the essay paper, be it GS paper 3 or GS paper 2, you need to talk about regional disparity, not just in economic perspective, but also in human development. And the researcher himself is trying to give certain reasons for why this is the case. And the case is that, now you see, 10% of Indian population controls 77% of wealth. 10% of Indian population holds 77% of Indian wealth. Now this type of data we never get. This shows, we talk about the 1% in America. This shows an unprecedented level of disparity. That basically 90% is holding only 23% of the wealth. Now this only indicates that the states which are big have very big population and their human development indicators are basically showing that the wealth gap is also leading to problems related to human development. He's also talking about the fact that services and their quality with regards to education, healthcare or basic amenities is also questionable. The basic point is there has been considerable progress, but certain states are still performing not in the way they should. Now for us, this becomes significant because we need to now understand the larger perspective. The larger perspective is HDI as an indicator for India is useless because India as one unit does not give you the real picture. Once you go to the state level, you start to understand the state HDIs, and when you start to understand the state HDIs, you then start to realize that there are certain states which are performing as well as a European country, a developed country, and there are certain states which are performing below the national average itself. And this is where Indian policy makers, Indian policy making needs to be more proactive and more conscious so that we are going for targeted understanding and targeted development. Right? Are you getting the purpose of this discussion? Why did we discuss it? It's a very interesting alternative perspective and you are able to understand why there needs to be a more micro level intervention rather than a macro level intervention. It's a very interesting way of understanding HDI itself, which has now become more or less something which we don't discuss, and discuss a very obscure concept in itself. Okay. With this, we move to the third major article we discuss, and it's based on foreign law firms. Now, foreign law firms in America and in a lot of European countries, the legal firms, the institutions are very, very strong and very institutionalized. In India's lawyers are very important, but the way the corporate law or corporatization of law has happened in the West, India, it is not that much. So basically, you can still trust the legal system and lawyers generally in India. However, in America or in Europe, you would have to go through a whole process which is quite exploitative and very expensive in that sense. And corporate law and corporatization of law, the capitalistic based law concept, the legal system, is quite common. There are certain series and certain soap operas in America which also try to show this type of culture, which is this corporate culture of law. But in India, the Supreme Court was very clear that no foreign law firm can operate in India with regards to litigation or non-litigation or practice law in India. The Supreme Court was very clear. I'll give you the timeline also. However, the Supreme Court said that as much as they cannot practice, they cannot basically go into basic litigation, we allow for foreign legal firms to come into India and help their clients and have a consultative concept. They can give certain type of legal advisory, however they cannot practice. And therefore the Supreme Court then indicated to the Bar Council that they need to bring in certain rules and regulations to indicate for this new development, which is allowing foreign legal firms to come into India, set up an office and help their corporate members, corporate clients in certain legal advisory. It's advisory, not allowing them to work. It's about advisory. So therefore, 5 years after the Supreme Court allowed for foreign law firms and lawyers to visit India on a temporary period for legal advisory basis or legal advice to their clients, the Bar Council, a statutory body within the governing legal practices in India, has now published certain rules and regulations for opening offices in India. Now, what is the timeline of this development? The timeline of this development is that in 2018, March 13th, Justice A.K. Goyal and U.U. Lalit had ruled that foreign law firms and foreign lawyers cannot practice. This is the thing I said, cannot practice law in the country either in litigation or non-litigation side. However, it said that there is no bar for foreign law firms or foreign lawyers to come here for temporary period and advise their clients. And there's a concept of reciprocity which I will tell you, which is the more controversial aspect in this concept. Thereafter, on March 10th this year, the Bar Council of India has now notified the rules and registration regulations for foreign lawyers and law firms in India. 2022 the basic rules and regulations have been notified. And in this, what is more significant? Now you see what are the three basic tenets. This is what you need to remember for the examination. First is that foreign lawyers and law firms can practice, but in the way of advisory in areas such as foreign law, international arbitration, joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, intellectual property matters on a reciprocal basis. Now, what does this concept of reciprocal mean? Reciprocal means that if a law firm is employing foreign lawyers in India to advise a certain client, then this reciprocal concept, which has not been defined, Indian lawyers and Indian legal firms should be able to and should be allowed and will be allowed and need to coordinate with these firms to help Indian firms in those countries from which the legal institutions are coming from. So this means that Indian lawyers could be employed by these foreign legal firms for advisory in the host country or the country from which they are actually coming. For example, a basic consultancy company comes from America and does certain consultancy for Amazon here. So in the same way, under law, under these rules and regulations, they have to and in a way have to facilitate. Now there is no clarity with regards to have to facilitate, maybe, shall be, will. Nothing has been defined. But Indian lawyers can also go to America and represent Tata, for example, via that legal firm. So this reciprocal, that there needs to be reciprocity, that Indian lawyers should also be allowed to go to America or to that country from which the institution is originating, is something which is considered as an opportunity for Indian lawyers and legal firms outside India. So it's about globalizing legal services and it's about globalizing Indian lawyers in that sense. Now, how much is this going to work, how it will materialize, all of this is subject to be seen. However, there is a concept of reciprocal basis. Further, foreign lawyers, firms have to submit an undertaking that they will not practice Indian law in any form or any court in India itself, tribunal, board, any other legal authority. They should not be involved in any Indian law. International law, okay, but no Indian law. And last but not the least, the Bar Council of India has a right to not recognize you. You have to register. It is mandatory with the Bar Council of India. For every 5 years, you have to renew your registration with the Bar Council of India. And it can refuse to not register you if it technically leads to disproportionate behavior or disproportionate activity against the number of Indian lawyers or legal firms. So we are safeguarding our own legal interest also and our lawyers in that sense. Now this topic, before we go to the prelims bytes, let me give you a basic understanding, and then we'll revise and then we'll move to prelims byte. Now, first, simple point. What is the argument? No Indian law practice. Second, advisory. But the more interesting aspect is the concept of reciprocal. That Indian lawyers can now get access to certain things which they were not getting access to previously. Now, will this materialize in the way the Bar Council of India is thinking is subject to be seen. But if there's a question, if there is a basic statement based question in the prelims examination, or there's a mains question which says that are legal firms allowed, foreign legal firms allowed to establish offices in India? Yes, they are. However, there are certain caveats, there are certain conditions on that, and the condition is no practice of Indian law. Now, before we go into the prelims section, let me revise what we've done in the past 40-45 minutes. First, we understood India's performance as the president of the UNSC, and therein we have a lot of achievements, and India has shown decisive leadership, and that's a very significant, very significant concept and a very important article. Do note down the resolutions and the countries which are mentioned in that article. Then second, we tried to understand HDI and how it can be made more relevant if seen at this micro level, at the state level. And thereafter we can see that certain states, 19 plus 5, what we see is that basically 60 to 70% of the states are performing very well when it comes to HDI. However, regional disparity and regional inequality is manifesting itself in a certain way. Therein it is getting reflected. It is getting reflected in the data of the HDI. And last but not the least, we now have understood this new regulation which has come through, which was indicated in 2018, wherein foreign legal firms can perform within India only under advisory basis and under reciprocal basis. We don't know what it technically means, or the Bar Council of India has not technically defined it. There's a lot of apprehension and criticism that it can lead to corporatization of law in India itself. However, let us see how it is getting implemented and how it will be implemented in that sense. So till this point, I hope you understand the basic three major mains articles. Then we'll move on to the prelims articles. Can we agree to the three we've done already? Yes or no? Okay, perfect. Now, there are four very simple but very straightforward articles which were there within the Hindu newspaper. Though one of them, which is this one, which is the IPCC panel report, this is something which is relevant for your mains also. But unfortunately, the West has made a mockery of IPCC reports. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which does not do research itself but actually publishes or recognizes other publications, it has been for the past 10 years publishing report after report after report that 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to make sure 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.5. We've been hearing this for quite a long time. Now, because developed countries are the last to get impacted generally, and the least developed countries which are going to be impacted the first, this issue has never been taken very seriously. Global warming, climate change has been made a mockery by America itself under Donald Trump generally, and Americans as it is the dumbest people in this world technically don't understand what really is climate change, and generally how all extreme weather events, they are seeing more hurricanes, they are seeing more heat waves, but still they don't understand that it's basically real. The basic point is, for the first time, the IPCC has used a word, and that word is rapidly closing window of opportunity. Now this is again hi-fi thing. It says technically the window of opportunity is closing to make sure that this 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are able to keep it within it. So the concept was, you see the bureaucratic language which they use, which is human well-being and planetary health, and there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure livable and sustainable future for all. Basically saying that you need to technically take this seriously. The train is leaving the station. But America and generally the Paris Climate Agreement, the COP21 or be it the UNFCCC, has now literally become a joke. The Green Climate Fund has also become a joke. They said that they would be allocating $100 billion every year, and it has already been 5 years since they had pledged that, and nothing has come through. And basically, now IPCC reports have technically become a joke. Literal joke they've become, because we every time read it. Yes, everything is burning, everything is problem, extreme weather events, forest fires are happening, hurricanes are happening, typhoons are coming, technically more cyclones are happening, India is seeing heat waves, Europe for the first time, whole southern European sector was burning. Still, they don't really care. And if they did care, there would be more urgency and these reports would be taken seriously. So the irreversible adverse impact of overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius is something which nobody wants to understand. And the basic point of the matter is that India is expected to do more when we are not the ones who polluted the world itself. See, the PE5 members, these Americans, the British, the French, the European sector, they are the ones who actually added billions and billions tons of carbon into the atmosphere when industrializing. Now, when it comes to our opportunity to industrialize or go for further higher level of development, we need to do it in a clean way. And they are the ones who technically have polluted the most, but now talk about clean energy. Now, this is where India has been very, very clear that you can't have this double standard. That is why the concept of common but differentiated responsibility. Yes, we all understand the world is burning, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility. So basically, there's a proper shunning of responsibility here. The fact of the matter that climate justice is a word which has come through again quite a lot during these past 2 to 3 years, where the countries which are contributing the least to climate change are impacted the most. However, still climate justice does not impact you. Like terrorism, when we used to say to the Americans, to the West, that there's terrorism, they used to say, where is terrorism? And then 9/11 happened and terrorism is everywhere. Therefore, in the same way, till they will not get impacted in their own way, they will technically not accept that the IPCC reports are very important and they're talking about a closing window. Now, why am I discussing this? It's not about technically telling the grassroots level reality. It's about understanding that they're using a new word, which is closing window, because it is believed that once we tip over this 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will go into a zone when we cannot come back. And then it will go to 2 degrees, then it will go to 3 degrees, and thereafter Earth will technically start to have certain climatic changes which will make it non-livable. And therefore, as much as we are obsessed by our own issues and countries are fighting over imaginary lines and borders, the larger issue technically are being ignored, and the West itself is showing its hypocrisy, that their problem is our problem, but our problem is not their problem. And their basic point of the matter is, when it was ozone, they responded very well. But when it comes to this, they are technically not responding to countries in Polynesia, which are going underwater rapidly year by year. So this is something wherein you need to keep an understanding of this word if it comes in the examination, or use it for sure in your mains examination, which is rapidly closing window of opportunity. Then we have an interesting concept of SCO. And SCO, how Buddhism has now become a certain point of convergence, where India is using its soft power, because India is unity in diversity. It has multiple religions, multiple cultures. And within SCO, the ironical part was that a lot of countries had a Buddhist influence in that sense. And therefore, in a first of its kind event, India hosted a conference last week in what is called Shared Buddhist Heritage under the ambit of the SCO, which saw scholars from Russia, China, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Belarus, Bahrain, Myanmar, the UAE and Kazakhstan coming and talking about it. Though technically some of these countries don't have Buddhism generally, but it was a way of coming and converging on certain concepts. And the aim was technically to talk about or re-establish the trans-cultural linkage and seek out what is called commonalities between Buddhist art of Central Asia, art styles, archaeological sites and antiquities. Basically, they are trying to use Buddhism as a form of convergence, as a form of soft power, where we can bring in everybody together, and within this organization itself, which is dominated by China and also as Pakistan, India is trying to find its own groove and its own space with regards to cultural identity. Therefore, just as a form of revision, SCO members, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, India, Pakistan and China. But as you can see that the members which came were not the SCO members, but within the ambit of the SCO members, we were able to see that India is pushing for Buddhism, its soft power, its cultural identity as a form of diplomacy. This is a very important concept and a very important moment where India is now finding Buddhism as a form of cooperation with at least China in that sense. Thereafter, two basic articles on economics. I hope everybody is following me till this point. Two basic articles on economics, and then we'll look at the mains question before I give you the basic overview of what we've done in this session. Now, herein comes a little bit of jittering news, which is that our Q3 performance has slowed down to 4.4%. 4.4%, which is technically for the first time that we've gone below 5. We had Q2 performance, the second quarter performance was 6.3%. Now, the finance minister is technically saying that its growth has not gotten shallower, momentum is still there. And basically this slowing down is because of the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector, the gross value addition, the GVA was quite less, which again is technically showing what we see a recessionary trend across the world itself. And therefore there's a major push to make sure that we in India generally don't go into that deflationary cycle itself. However, the GDP has slowed down for the third quarter. This will impact the larger, let us see how Q4 is. However, as of right now, we have gone under the 5% mark for Q3. But what is more interesting is what she mentioned with regards to the current account deficit. And she's argued that the current account deficit, which is technically the trade between visible and invisible, import and export, and basically import and export, when imports are more, exports are less, you get a current account deficit. And when there are more exports and less imports, there's a current account surplus. Now, in this, what she's arguing is that we've narrowed the gap down. We in India generally have a current account deficit because of the fact that we import crude oil and we technically import a lot of gold also, which is the second article we are going to discuss with regards to economics. And our capital account with regards to FDI, FPI is quite well in that sense. But we have also narrowed it down for this fiscal and this quarter itself. And let us see that basically how does this impact the larger performance of Indian economy. Though the current account deficit has narrowed down due to moderation in oil prices and import intensive consumption demand going down, still there is a deficit. It helps us in then keeping our forex reserves much more intact. However, the two basic purposes of discussing this article under prelims is, first, we have gone under that 5%, 4.4% for Q3. And then thereafter, the most important concept itself, which is that current account deficit has been narrowed down. Let us see how it ends rather than how it is performing right now in that sense. Then the last is a very interesting, and you would have seen a lot of different news coming through with regards to people trying to smuggle gold in different parts of their bodies, and generally gold smuggling going up. And this is technically indicative of gold imports in India, because the government in July of 2022 put in they increased the custom duty from 7.5% to 12.5%, and then a 10% social welfare surcharge in order to make sure that our trade deficit was reduced. And it also showed a lot of good impact in the sense of 30% reduction in gold imports itself. However, all of this only leads to more smuggling, because if there is an increase in custom duty, they will try to smuggle more. And therefore, what we've seen is that there's smuggling of gold has gone to a 4-year high in 2022-23, and which is technically an alarming rise when it comes to unauthorized trade in this metal. And therefore, in the first 11 months itself, we have seen that 4,000 kilograms has been seized, which is technically 10% higher than what was seized previously and is equal to all seizures within the last 2 years. Now, this is a very interesting thing which we've also previously discussed in CNA, wherein the finance minister was the first one to point out that there's a correlation between two things. First is gold imports and gold smuggling. If gold smuggling is technically going up, it is technically showing that the demand for gold is equally high, but the proportionality shows that imports are also high. But for the first time, we are seeing that because the imports are falling because of these two interventions, and there's an official drop in imports, smuggling has not correspondingly dropped. And though previously we used to discuss and understand it as a direct proportion, Now we are looking at as inverse proportionality. But it's an interesting concept in itself. And two things which you need to remember is first this relationship between gold import and gold smuggling and the 4-year high we've been to. Now, before we go to the mains question, let me summarize what we've done till this point. I hope first everybody is clear with regards to what we've done in the 7 articles, and then I'll give you a basic overview of that, and then we'll move to the mains questions. Are we clear with regards to what we've done till this point? No issues in that? Everyone, come on. Yes? Okay. So, we've done 3 mains level, 4 prelims level articles. The 3 mains level, first was India's report card as the president of the UNSC, and we have seen Myanmar, Afghanistan, and more than that, the terrorism committee, the UN peacekeeping, and over and above that, how India pushed what is called maritime security as the concept. Thereafter, we move to HDI as a macroeconomic macro indicator to a micro indicator of state by state, and a major spread in that regard. How that major spread shows that the HDI of certain states are comparable to European countries, but not when it comes to the other. And regional inequality and regional disparity is now manifesting itself in human development also, which is not basically a surprise to us. But people talk about how economic and HDI are two opposing concepts, but technically it isn't. Wherever there is regional inequality, there is also human development issues, and therefore there's a major correlation between them. But small state, big state issue can be very clear with regards to Gujarat and Haryana, how technically show a big state and a small state. However, very big or very high gross, what we call as state GDP. However, human development indicators are not as high as the other ones. Thereafter, we went to the third basic concept, which was the concept of legal firms. Can they establish their offices in India? Now they can under the Bar Council regulations. However, we talked about the concept of reciprocity. They are not allowed to practice Indian law, and more than that, Indian lawyers are protected under this law itself. Thereafter, 4 basic concepts I'll just discuss with you. IPCC report, closing window of opportunity. Second was the concept of very simply understanding the gold import and the economic, which is basically how gold imports are falling because of the intervention, but smuggling has gone quite up. Second was the current account deficit narrowing down, and Indian GDP performance going to 4.4%. And last but not the least was SCO and Buddhism, India using its soft power to become a major diplomatic power in that sense. So with this, let's look at the 2 mains questions for your practice. India's UNFC presidency raised the bar high, and I've picked up this line exactly from the Hindu article, so you can expect this type of question. India's UNFC presidency raised the bar high with regards to focus, policy and resolution. Elucidate would mean you have to demonstrate how this is technically true. Can foreign law firms practice in India? The answer is no, but they can establish their offices. Discuss the rules and regulations laid down by the Bar Council. Very simple questions, very straightforward questions in that regard. And I hope that you will also go to the Telegram channel and attempt the prelims based questions which are going to be uploaded as soon as this session is over. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you tomorrow with again 7 to 8 articles. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.